boldly engaging the mindless propaganda of our time, apparently with reason. This is Rage of the Age.
This is Rage of the Age, and we have with us today prior elementary school educator of 28 years in Southern California. She's also served on the teacher union board for 3 years. She's an advocate for educational policies that are friendly to children and to be a voice for teachers and parents to be heard. She's the author of Standing Up to Goliath, where she deals with a lot of these issues with a lot of takes from like 4 dozen different teachers across the country, what's going on with the school system and the teachers union. And she is also the founder of a charity called For Kids and Country. You can find that at forkidsandcountry.org, where she is still continuing to fight for our children and for the education system. I want to introduce to you today Rebecca Friedrichs. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thank you.
A little while back, you provided me a link to a conference, I guess it was. You were giving a lecture there. I believe it was in Florida. And I watched it. I watched some other people talk about some different topics as well, which all of it was intriguing. But then I heard you explain what was going on in schools, especially with the teachers' unions, and how they use usurpatious methods to just invade systems, take it over, and kind of force these things in the education system. And you had me like, I was shocked, but not. I mean, I expect this, but it was shocking and a little bit angry. I was really upset. And I'm thinking, we have got to stop this. So why don't you go ahead and start from there? What is going on that's so dangerous?
Sure. Well, first of all, that interview or that speech that you watched, feel free to post it on your sites to share with your listeners. So the teachers unions, first thing people need to know is they're not really teachers and they're not really a union. So if you are someone who wants to usurp the educational system or usurp a country, what would you do? You would sneak in behind the sweetest faces and the most vulnerable, and you would say that you are their friend, that you are there to help them when you're not. So people need to understand that I'm not talking about loving teachers here. I'm not talking about a good union that actually would support its employees. I'm talking about Marxists who are posing as teachers and unions. And what they've done is for many decades, they've infiltrated the teaching profession and infiltrated our schools. What folks don't realize is our public schools are truly the curriculum, the policies, everything is controlled by a labor union, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers. Those labor unions are extreme far left individuals who truly are, they stand with Black Lives Matter. They helped start Black Lives Matter, which has told us, Black Lives Matter has told us we are trained Marxists. So this is the agenda that they are pushing. They're pushing it into our schools. They are indoctrinating our children. They have indoctrinated many already through K-12 and university system. And now they have brought many of these young people into our schools as activist teachers. So you have a lot of teachers like myself who've been in the system for years and years and years and who would never, ever teach a Marxist agenda. We're aware Marxism leads to communism. We want to fight for our free republic, but they bully teachers like myself and other dedicated teachers who are pro-America, pro-family, and they have usurped our authority. They are undermining parents, parental authority, and I'd love to share the details, whatever details you'd like to know with your listeners.
Well, give some examples of how they bully teachers.
Okay, let's see. When I was a teacher union leader, for example, so here I was serving on the executive board of my local union. You would think I'd have a voice, right?
Right.
Well, when I spoke up for the teachers in my district, if I didn't toe the line of the union politics, I was isolated. For example, they don't like school choice. They want to destroy school choice. Why?
Right.
because private schools and charter schools and homeschools don't have unions. And so the union loses out on their money and their control if you have school choice. So they were pushing against choice. Well, I wanted choice because when I researched it, I knew that it was what was best for families, best for children, and even best for our country. And it cost less money. So it was best for the taxpayer. And you were getting a better product. It's called competition. Competition breeds excellence. So anyhow, I was for school choice and for daring to take that radical stance of being pro school choice. The teachers unions bullied me so severely that even during a staff meeting, a regular staff meeting at my school, I was called a radical right winger because I dared to say, no, I'm not willing to get on a phone bank and destroy school choice in California. So they labeled me a radical right winger. And for the rest of that school year, I was isolated. They wouldn't talk to me. They made it uncomfortable for teachers to be around me. That's just one small example. When I was serving at the state level, or I was a local teacher union board member, but I was at a state level conference, so representing my teacher friends. And another teacher, actually during Q&A, had the courage to stand up and say, the teachers in my district are concerned because our money is being spent on politics, and we don't want our money spent on politics. We want it spent on representing us. How can we have a voice? For her crime of asking how her money is spent and asking how her union represents her, the union leaders, the NEA and CTA leaders, ganged up on the stage like bullies and told all of us, there were about 300 of us in the room, they told all of us, basically, how dare you question us? Everything we do is right. Our politics are right. If you don't agree with our politics, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe and all this other stuff. And they shut her down, completely shut her down, bullied the entire room full of teachers. That's how they treat teachers. Think about political correctness and all this mean stuff out there. Teachers have been putting up with that for a good 40, 50 years.
Wow. Now, there was a time where you didn't want to belong to the union and you didn't pay the political dues, but then you changed your mind later in order to be more involved with the union. For those listening that are considering that contemplation, do you think it's better to, that's a dilemma. Do I pay and fund their garbage, or do I pay so that I can have a voice? Because I think you pointed out you can't have a voice in the union if you don't pay their dues, but you have to belong to the union and what it tells you. So what do you think is the better move?
Well, I belonged and I served as a union leader and I had no voice and I got bullied. Right. And the only way you have a voice in the union is if you decide to be a Marxist yourself and you agree with all of their agenda. So if you agree with the sex ed I'm about to describe to you, where, little children are told to have anal sex so that they won't get pregnant, if you agree with undermining parental authority, if you agree with no discipline policies in the schools, lenient discipline policies so your classroom becomes a war zone, if you agree with bringing Black Lives Matter ideology into the schools, if you agree with all of that, then you'll have a voice in the union. So if you're a far left socialist and you want to end America as we know it, and you don't want us to be a republic anymore, then you would be welcome in the teachers union. Mm-hmm. Every teacher I know doesn't agree with any of that, and they don't want to be a part of it. And every single teacher I know who actually got involved in the union and tried to change it could not change it. It is not redeemable. They don't want to be redeemed. So we actually took a case to the U.S. Supreme Court because when I was So when I didn't pay the union, I still had to pay the union. So I was a non-member, but at that time, for 40 some years, if you were a non-member, you still had to be an agency fee payer. So you could only avoid paying a little bit. Let me give you an example. My husband was a professor at San Diego State University. He chose to be a non-union member. He still paid $1,200 a year in agency fees to a union who not only did not support him, undermined all of his values and beliefs, but also when he was director of the school, he still had to pay them that money, and they filed grievances against him, and they didn't defend him. It's unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up.
Wow.
So I brought a case to the U.S. Supreme Court, myself and 10 teachers from California, and we sued California Teachers Association and National Education Association. And our case was heard in 2016. A month later, Justice Scalia died. So we lost his vote and we had a tie. But another case was built upon our case. That case won in June 2018. So now every teacher, every government employee in this country is free to pay unions nothing, zero.
Thank
because
goodness.
the court, yes, thank goodness, because the court agreed with us that everything the unions do is political. Even collective bargaining is political in the public sector because you're bargaining with money provided by the taxpayers, and because the unions throw their billions into putting people into office. So the unions are negotiating across the table with people they put into office, people they're controlling. And so the unions are on both sides of the table. The taxpayers never invited to the table. Right. That's 100% political. So the justices agreed that that it's inappropriate to force anyone to pay a union. So now the unions, unfortunately, still have monopoly control over, if you're in a union shop, they're your monopoly bargaining agent because the unions fought to be your monopoly bargaining agent. You can't bargain for yourself. So unfortunately, you're stuck in that. However, you don't have to pay them anymore. And when they call you a free rider, no. They're the free riders who have forced you to have their representation and forced you to pay them all these years. Stand up, say no, stop paying them. And then the other thing is, good folks need to stand together. Our goal is to get these unions out of the teaching profession. That's a longer haul, but we're in the middle of it. That's what we're fighting for. And to be perfectly honest, our best hope is President Trump. And if we can get a new Republican majority in our Congress, we would have a chance, because the Democrat Party, unfortunately, is 100% controlled by the teachers' unions. The money goes to Democrats. The Democrats are they've been corrupted. And if there's Democrats listening, I hope you'll stand together and fight for your party, because right now they're controlled by teachers' unions who are corrupt and who are brutal and who are destroying our schools, our children, and our country on purpose.
Yeah, and then talking about brutal, I've seen where you've said before that union reps would be sympathetic to what you, the teachers, were saying, and the board members and things, but they were so frightened to talk to the union bosses that it practically just went nowhere, because that's how in depth this intimidation is. That the union doesn't represent you. I mean, would this be a fair comparison? It's like saying, if you work for this organization, you have to pay dues to the Republican Party, or you can't work here. And if you have complaints, we won't listen to it unless you pay it. Is that kind of like a similar scenario?
That's precisely right. Because I've actually had the union say to me, and they've said this in public writing in the mainstream media, I've read it about myself during my case, that if she doesn't like it, she can just leave the public school. So in other words, if I won't toe the line of their radical leftist ideology, if I don't agree with the Green New Deal, if I don't want to support AOC and the squad, if I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi or whatever, if I don't agree with what the unions are pushing out there, then they're telling me then I should just leave my profession.
Right.
Well,
and that's a form of intimidation, because it's like, do you want your job or not?
Exactly.
I mean, you invest years in schooling and debt to become a teacher. You're in the school system, and it's working the way like they tell you it works. And if you don't like it, we'll just leave. Well, that's easier said than done.
Well, precisely. I mean, I need to pay my bills, right? And feed my own children. And not only that, my students deserve to have a great teacher. And I was a great teacher because I worked hard, and because I studied, and because I learned the truth, and I taught them the truth. I didn't teach them some fake ideology that the teachers Truly, the teachers' unions have rewritten the scientific method. They removed empirical evidence and changed it to consensus. And they'll only take the consensus of the radical leftists that agree with them. So truly, they're teaching our children lies. And so to remove a teacher like myself, who's actually teaching the truth, who actually loves the children and protects them, I actually respect the parents and want to work with them. The unions are damaging the students and the parents and the country. So that's why I stood up and said, no, I'm not going to fall to your mafia tactics. I'm going to fight back. But most teachers are too terrified to fight back. The number one question I was asked by teachers and the general public during my lawsuit against the unions, number one question, are you afraid for your life? Are you afraid for your life? And when Justice Scalia died, he died 1 month after our case was heard, which caused us to lose his vote. And the number one question to this day that people ask me is, do you think the unions killed Justice Scalia? Wow. No, I don't think that. However, the fact that millions of people do think it tells you how brutal the unions are. That tells you how frightened people are of these organizations. That is just wrong. That's evil. That in a free country, America, the freest country ever known, that we would have brutal organizations that people are so afraid of. They're afraid of dying if they stand up to them, or losing their job if they stand up to them. They run almost every government agency in America. That's wrong. We need to get them out. And that's my goal.
They do need to go. But to give another idea of just how deplorable their methods are, you've mentioned before where even if teachers are not going to go along and teach what they want taught, they'll bypass the teachers anyway and bring in these special instructors or whatever, and still teach the children, not tell anybody they're doing it, bypass the teacher, don't even inform the parents, and they just flat out start indoctrinating the children anyway.
That's right. So what I'd like to do is shock your listeners a little to hear the stuff they want me to teach your kids. And then it's Planned Parenthood that they bring into the classroom when a teacher like myself says no. So let me just build this up for you. Number one, they write these laws. They get away with this mostly in blue states, Democrat states, because they're controlling the Democrats. I live in California. The teachers' unions have a 2/3 supermajority in the legislature in California, Democrats. They passed on party lines something called the California Healthy Youth Act. There's nothing healthy about it, and it brings in what's called comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE. CSE has been pushed through the United Nations for decades. They have been destroying many countries with CSE. It's sexualizing children. It is not healthy. It's unhealthy. And so when they brought it in through California, it was passed by all Democrats and one Republican. And those of us here in California know he's not a real Republican. He doesn't stand with our values. And everyone who voted against it was a Republican. Okay, so they bring in the California Healthy Youth Act. What are we doing now in California? Number one, teachers are told that we have to teach children all of the methods to prevent pregnancy. There are 19 last time I was trained. And the teachers I know who are being trained in this, just for example, pardon me, are being told to teach children that they should have, or that they can have, use something called a dental dam, which used to be used only for oral surgery. Now they're telling our children to use these. They're a vinyl shield. Use it as a shield between your mouth and your partner's vagina, vulva, or anus. So they are teaching our children to have oral on anal sex. Okay? The first time I encountered this, it was a 5th grade classroom, 11-year-olds. My own niece was impacted by this in 5th grade. She was traumatized when she came home and told her mother and myself about it. We are being told that we need to teach children where every Planned Parenthood is located, give them the address and tell them how to get there, and let them know that they have the right to get all the birth control they want and abortion without their parents' knowledge or permission. And we are told that the teachers are often not told this, but the school, like if the child goes to the school counselor, they can be taken to Planned Parenthood by the school without parental knowledge or permission. I don't know one parent that's okay with that. We even have LGBTQ parents who fight with us on the ground against this stuff because they say, wait a minute, you're taking my parental rights.
Right.
They, when they wrote this law, and when they write these laws, especially in leftist states, they write into the law that if teachers are unqualified, in other words, if a teacher like me says, no way, I'm not teaching this, then it says the experts will come in and teach the children. That's when Planned Parenthood comes in. Now, parents say, wait a minute, I can opt out. Well, good luck to you, because the law only allows parents to opt out of the actual instruction on the biological part. So the part you actually might not mind your child learning, like, how your body changes and stuff like that, you can opt out of that. But the gender ideology, so they have this gender ideology where they will tell your children, starting in preschool, any classroom, any grade, any subject, if you have an activist teacher in the classroom, will tell your children, when you were born, your parents didn't know your gender. So they assigned you a gender. There's really a spectrum, a never-ending spectrum of genders, and someday you'll figure out your gender on your own. Your parents are old-fashioned. Oh, yeah, they might believe that there's only male and female, but that's not true. Your parents are old-fashioned. We know better. So they're turning kids against parents. They're teaching them lies because biologically we know that there are two genders, male and female. God himself says he made us male and female, so they're attacking your religious liberties as well. Then they tell your kids not to believe you, undermining parental authority in every way, shape, and form. Take you for an abortion and your parents don't know it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, and in my opinion, they should be arrested and put on a sex offender list for this stuff. But they're getting away with it, and they're getting away with it because teachers keep paying unions, and unions keep pouring this money to fund Democrats who are corrupt and radical leftists, and they are undermining our families and our country. And this is all part of a Marxist agenda to destroy the family structure, to destroy America as we know it. And it's an emergency. I tell people the schoolhouse is on fire. Teachers and children are inside. We need to save them.
I hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you really like Rage of the Age, we will encourage you to leave a review on the platform that you're listening to, but especially if you would like a copy of my book, Not in the Wind, Earthquake, or Fire, which is a first-hand account of my second deployment to Iraq, and it's filled with many spiritual insights. I'm going to give away 10 copies for free, and every week I will give out a copy for someone who leaves a review of this podcast. You can do that by going to Twitter, write your review, and then hashtag it Rage of the Age Now, or you can go to Facebook, find our page, Rage of the Age, click the reviews, recommend us, and then write in your review. I hope next week to give away a copy of Not in the Wind, Earthquake, or Fire to someone who leaves a review.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
Do you believe that most parents are unaware of this, or apathetic, or just don't know what to do? Because I'm thinking of myself. We started homeschool years ago for numerous reasons. But if my child was in a school and I learned they were doing this, I'd be dancing on desks. I'd be flipping desks. I'd be, I'd have Molotov cocktails ready or something. I don't know. I'm like, there's no way you're going to do this with my children. You've lost your mind.
Yeah.
I'm baffled why I don't see a mob of angry parents doing the same thing. What's going on there?
Yeah. You know what? Bless you, Philip. Look, we have a lot of parents like you, and they are fighting. Here in California, we have thousands of parents. This one mom started a Facebook page. I think she has 50,000 followers at this point. Okay, and she's called Informed Parents of California, and a bunch of people have started Informed Parents Facebook pages in all different states. These parents are screaming, yelling, fighting. They have done sit-outs where they keep their kids out of school all day. Here's the problem. The mainstream media won't cover it. Shame, 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 shame on the mainstream media. How dare they? And they won't cover these parents. So we only get coverage from people like you. We'll get some small radio shows, or we'll get a couple of conservative outlets will show up. But even our local newspapers often won't show up. Why? Because they're all afraid of the teachers' unions. They're kowtowing to these people. And it just makes me so angry, because we have little kids who are being sexualized in our schools, who are in dangerous school situations thanks to the lenient discipline policies pushed by these unions and their Democrat buddies. And we're all in danger. And the media is going to play this game? How dare they? So we have had parents, and I've been with them. We have traveled to the California Capitol State House multiple times. We go inside to the Senate Education Committee, and we speak out against these policies, against the sex ed. Look, we had a parent who brought a bill. She had a California state senator, a Republican guy, bring a bill, and she was the citizen sponsor of the bill. We all came to the Senate Education Committee to stand with her. She testified on the stage, and we sent boxes and boxes. I'm talking thousands of letters from parents all over the state. People from Muslim families, Christian families, atheist families, Democrat families, Republican families, all over, thousands of letters. We all show up, hundreds of us show up. We all go to the microphone and tell them, we are for transparency. All we were asking for in this bill was transparency, that they let the parents see what's in the curriculum.
Yes.
You know that the California Senate Education Committee, chaired by Connie Leyva, Senator Connie Leyva and her friends, on party lines, the Democrats voted against transparency for parents. The Republicans voted for transparency for parents. Those Democrats bullied us as parents. They told us, we filled the room, and there were people outside the door who couldn't fit in. They told us that we couldn't make any noise, that if they said something we didn't like, we couldn't go, ooh, oh, no. All we could do was wave our hands and wiggle them if we liked it. If we liked something was said, we could wave our hands and wiggle them, which, by the way, that's what the communists do.
Right.
And if we didn't like it, we were not allowed to make a peep. And if we made a peep, Connie Leyva would say, I'm going to have you taken out of here. They bullied us parents. They talked down to us, treated us like little kids, voted against our bill that was simply asking for transparency. That was all we were asking for. They voted against us. These are corrupt Democrats who are harming children, harming teachers, bullying teachers like me. That same Senator Connie Leyva, when I testified on a different bill trying to get school choice in California, and I shared the story of my niece who has epilepsy and couldn't get a good education, and thanks to the unions, her charter school was closed down after 1 year. Connie Leyva bullied me after I testified, telling the child's story. She bullied me for daring to stand against the teachers' unions because she does their bidding. This is corrupt. These legislators are supposed to serve the people, not the union. So that's the long and short of it, Philip.
Wow, that's some horrendous things, and just so others are aware, this isn't just in California. You said before, if you have a teachers union in your state, chances are these things are going on there too. This isn't a separate issue, and you need to look into what's going on. And again, I'm glad you mentioned Informed Parents of California as a Facebook page, and that there are other such pages popping up. Look, if you're a parent and you're wondering what in the world are they teaching our kids, you need to find out. They're not going to tell you. And if people don't want to tell you what they're doing, you should immediately be suspect to what, well, okay, why are you hiding this from me? Have you heard of like where I just see in Tennessee and other places where they're like having parents sign these waiver forms to not be present with their child in home when they're doing their online schooling. because they don't want the parents to hear what they're teaching the kids. And I'm thinking, yeah, good luck with that. I'm going to listen in on everything you have to say. But that's how frightened they are that you'll know what they're teaching your children. I mean,
well, yeah, because they belong in jail for some of the stuff they're teaching their children. You know what? I want to backtrack just a little. Yes, your listeners should join Informed Parents of California Facebook page. It's a great page. They show you all kinds of stuff I can't show you. You know, like they'll put pictures out of books and stuff like that.
Right.
But they can also come to our website for kidsandcountry.org, and we will lead them to all sorts of different groups that will help them to understand the sex ed and help empower them. And they can also find our Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter and all that. And we all will help them to get educated. But yeah, the virtual learning, here's why there are teachers who are saying, sign this form so the parents won't see what they're teaching in virtual learning. That's the teachers union's fault too. Because you said you watched my hour-long talk. Well, in that talk, I exposed how they're teaching the sex ed through the virtual learning. They're using something called the Healthy Teen Network. There's the word healthy again. There's nothing healthy about it. But that's what communists do. They use propaganda. They use words that mean one thing to you and me and another thing to them. So when they say healthy, we're thinking, oh, great, this is healthy. They're going to teach our kids to eat right and, take care of their bodies. Oh, no. Healthy to them means they're going to teach our kids about abortion, and they're going to teach our kids to sleep around, and they're going to teach our kids to stop listening to their parents and all of this. So on the Healthy Teen Network, there is actually a lesson that I highlight in that talk you heard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something like, I don't know, tips for your sex during COVID-19 or something like that. And the lesson's taught by a woman named Ella Dorval Hall, who's a recent college graduate in, I don't know, environmental studies or something. And she claims to be a sex expert. She teaches our kids, her 5 tips are that our kids should be sexting. She tells our kids to sext. And then she leads them to a link where they can get 54 tips on what they should do through their sexting. I followed that link. It was unbelievable, the stuff that she's telling these kids to do through their sexting. Things that could destroy their lives, by the way, and things that are dangerous. And there were even pictures of handcuffs on the page. She teaches our kids that they should be masturbating. She calls it solo sex. She teaches our kids that they should be looking at porn. Hey, have you ever looked at porn? Are you interested? She leads them on how to do it. She teaches our kids that they should talk to online sex experts, and she has 5 linked there that they can go directly to these quote-unquote sex experts who teach comprehensive sexuality education. I followed some of them. Unbelievable. These people are perverts, and she is directing our children to perverts, online, the very perverts we're trying to protect them from. She's directing them there. And we have the California Department of Education sending emails to our school districts and our county departments of ed, leading them to these sorts of resources. It's unreal to videos called amaze videos that are unbelievable, made like cartoons so kids will like them, but they're pornography. And they're teaching kids. That's what they're doing through the virtual learning, and teaching our kids to be radical activists for Black Lives Matter, to hate America. That's why they don't want parents watching. I was a public school teacher for 28 years. I was a hardworking teacher. There are many wonderful teachers in our public school system, but they're all trapped in a corrupt system. And it's controlled by the teachers' unions. I don't care what state you're in. I've seen the teachers' unions destroy schools in Texas, Tennessee, Florida. I don't care if you're a blue state or a red state. I've seen the teachers' unions destroy schools in your state. It's time to pull our kids out of public schools. It's time to do whatever you can to get them out of those schools. And it's time for teachers in public schools to stop paying those unions, to put yourself second. Put the kids first. You think the union's protecting you, giving you better pay and pension? Look, it's at the expense of childhood innocence. It's at the expense of our freedoms in America. You think you're going to get your pension when we're not a free country anymore? Think again. It's time for teachers to stand up and stop funding these unions and to reject them outright.
Yes.
And I hope they do.
Absolutely. Parents, if you're listening today to this, You have to pay attention to what's happening. And we can't be complacent no more. You need to be involved with what's going on in your schools. And it's going to be a fight, but my question is, are your kids worth fighting for? I think they are. And this isn't just conservative children, Christian children in particular. If you love your child and you don't want them taught this garbage, for whatever reason, it's out there, it's growing large, and it has to be resisted. Get involved with groups that are forming on Facebook. Go to 4kidsandcountry.org to see what options there are. Mobilize. Look, they're intimidating you, but we need to gang up back on them and start yanking on their strings and make it uncomfortable for them. They've been bullied for too long. And the only way I know to deal with a bully is to smack them right back. I mean, I don't know how else you can handle it. We parents, seriously, this is not something that happens just in California. This is the whole nation at stake. Your children are at stake, and we better stand up to the plate. Rebecca, it has been a real pleasure having you on this segment today, and I pray that everything that you take forward in the fight is successful in the future.
Thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure to be here. And if there's time, I just want to tell your parents one last thing. If they go to forkidsandcountry.org and click on the first menu item, it's called Adopt a Teacher. That's what you can do as a parent. It takes 3 minutes to read it. Learn how to adopt a teacher, because most teachers have no idea that their union is behind all of this. They honestly don't know. They've been told the union is their savior. I have a lot of teachers who attack me, and then when they learn the truth, they go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. So adopt a teacher, educate them. Also, parents, the teachers' unions have infiltrated and corrupted the PTA. They did that in the 1960s. If you're in the PTA, get out. Change to a PTO. And we have actually, I wrote a whole chapter about that in my book. So you can find all that information on our website, forkidsandcountry.org. We need your help, parents. Teachers cannot do this alone.
I want to take a quick opportunity to give a shout out to 2 podcasts that I want to recommend that you listen to. The first one, of course, is the Gary Wilkerson podcast, which is a podcast of the guest that you're listening to today for today's program. The Gary Wilkerson podcast, you can find it at worldchallenge.org, and he's currently doing a series on the attributes of God. I highly recommend that you go there and listen to it yourself. I also want to highlight for you Veterans Rant, Rattle, and Roll, with the emphasis on stopping the average of 22 suicides that take place on a daily basis. And the whole aspect of the show is to have veterans come on, rant, rattle, and roll, and talk about their lives and everything that's going on. And of course, to emphasize to others to not take your own life. Again, the Gary Wilkerson podcast and the Veterans Rant, Rattle, and Roll.
You're listening to Rage of the Age. Rage of the Age. Politics, religion, economics, and history with a conservative bend.
Welcome to the essay segment, and I have to say, this interview that I have had with Rebecca Friedrichs, oh man, has really got me fired up. I've not been angry for some time, and I am frustrated that this type of shenanigans is even tolerated and has gotten to this point. There could be a million theories that we can throw out there as to why we are where we are and point the blame here and there, but that's beyond where we need to be right now. Where we need to be right now is we identify the problem, we see the problem, and now we need to just start doing something about the problem. And we need to put it in check now before this gets absolutely out of control. She mentioned some of the ways in which this could be done. And I agree with some of the things that she's saying. I even want to add an additional option that perhaps maybe hasn't been thought of yet. But we can consider this as we go. But she had mentioned that the teacher unions are neither a union, nor is it full of teachers. It's basically professional socialists and communists who have basically taken over all the organizations, and they're top-down driven. We'll tell you what to believe, what to say, what to think. You just shut up and pay your dues and don't cross us. That's basically how they run those unions. They don't care for the teacher. They don't care for the students. They're using it as a vehicle to force feed their ideology into younger people. Why do people resort to indoctrinating of children? It's the same reason that the Nazis did it with the Hitler Youth. It's the same reason that the communists did it in the USSR, and why they still do it in China and North Korea and other places is because children lack life experience. Children are usually not going to ask a bunch of questions of you, and they follow the lead of the adults who are supposed to teach them right from wrong. Their minds are more moldable. It's easier to manipulate children than it is adults. And children can't fight back the way in which adults can fight back. That is why the fight for how education is now is absolutely of the most prime importance as an issue in our nation today, because it's gotten out of hand. Now, she's mentioned, one, take your kids out of school. Now, I know this is scary for a bunch of people, and trust me, I once was in that position. When my family decided to homeschool with our children, we never done it before. We never knew anyone else who ever did it before. We weren't even sure if it was legal. We had no idea. But we were so desperate with how our oldest son at the time was not being taught anything, but passed anyway. I mean, he's failing all his work as he brings it home, and we can see it. But they just keep passing him, and they tell us, oh, he's fine, nothing's wrong. And it was just on that basis that we decided, well, we can mess it up as much as they can. We might as well try homeschooling. And we found out it worked very well. But it was scary. And I understand it's absolutely scary. But I want to tell you the benefits of it. And I believe it's a viable option for many of you out there, that if you can make it work, you're going to be happy that you did it. And let me explain why. You have more options in homeschool than you have otherwise. You have the ability to plan your schedule better than you can with the school. Because let's face it, the school is set to hours that benefit them, the school, not anybody else. Everybody has to work around their schedule. You have to go the days they say, not the days they don't say. See, if you homeschool, you can start later in the day. You can have school at night. You can take a couple days off and go on a family vacation and not being worried about truancy or being counted absent. You have a lot more flexibility with the child. And here's another great benefit. If we can get all the work done in, say, 3 or 4 hours for that day, we're done. You're not dragging out the rest of the day just because that's the schedule that everybody else is crammed with. So what is normally done in, say, 6 to 8 hours in a school day, you could get done in 3 to 4 hours, depending on the efficiency of you and your student. And since you are more one-on-one with the student that you know and knows you, trust me, you are able to get through that work at a greater pace than is often done in a crammed classroom. The other benefit is you know what your child is being taught and what they're not being taught. This is of prime importance. See, here's the thing. And we're only scraping the tip of the iceberg, if you will, about the things that are being taught under CSE, the Comprehensive Sexual Education laws that have been passed, which are mandatory that you have to receive, and there's no opting out of it. Not of the parts that are the things you don't want your children learning. If you're not in your home talking about sexual identity and gender fluidity and identity of who you are and how to search for yourself, and that stuff's just crazy to you, guess what? You don't have to teach it to your children. And no other person is going to cram it down their neck and then try to go behind your back as a parent and tell those children that you don't have to tell your parents. You can go behind their backs and we'll cover for you, and you have a right to do this. They're ripping families apart. Absolutely horrendous. That's the benefit for you. And now you're thinking maybe, well, what does that do for their chances for schooling later and in college? Well, look, I have 2 kids that are in college. They've both been homeschooled. My other 2, they may go to college, they may not. That's something I don't push. But you know what? they are able to do other things academically that other kids who come from public school do just the same. And I have learned that many colleges actually prefer homeschoolers as students because they can actually do work on their own. And they've actually been taught things rather than having ideology as their primary course of study their entire time while they're in school. So it's not a bad option. If it's doable for you, it's something you should really absolutely consider. And then taking your kids out of the school also sends a message to your school boards and to your state governments, because they primarily depend on federal money, and a lot of state money is based upon also the same principle on a head count. You obviously don't want to give a school that has 10 children the same budget for that the school with, say, 1,000 kids has, right? It's varied upon the number of children in the school, obviously, for obvious reasons. That's why schools try to talk you out of homeschooling. That's why they threaten you. That's why they try to tell you can't do it, which half the time it's a lie. If you pull those kids out of those schools, and if it's done on a massive scale, you're sending a message that, you know what, you're not going to push this stuff on our children no more. Now you got their attention. So now when you start approaching your state governments about the education system, they either listen or perish. And if they have to perish, let them perish. If, in my opinion, if the schools have to crash and burn, let them crash and burn. If they're that decrepit and all they care about is political indoctrination rather than basic education, they need to crash and burn. Pure and simple. Of course, the other option she gave was for the teachers to not pay their unions. I absolutely agree with this on the same principle. Most of their money comes from teachers that they bully. Do you understand what I just said there? A lot of the money in the teachers' unions come from the very teachers that they bully from the top down. And the only thing that holds them in place is this fear of well, they represent you and they're going to make sure you have this, that, and the other, and they protect you, and they don't care about the teachers. They simply want their fees and then to do what they're told or get out of the way. Now imagine if entire blocks of teachers in schools said, we're no longer paying you. You've just ripped out the power base from under them. It is no wonder they're going to come out with great intimidation. It's like all extortion rings. It's all based on terror. Pay up or else. Well, it's the same thing with the mob-like teacher unions. A lot of unions are like this way. They work on coercion and power, and they form a monopoly of it, and they don't want to give it up. But if you take away their financial basis, you've just swept away a lot of their grip. So if you're a teacher, quit paying it. Now, I know this leads to, again, that fear, and this is why I want to advocate a third thing in the strategy in which she has brought up. And I wish I thought of this during the interview, and maybe we could have talked about it more, but I'm thinking of it now. If there's a real concern that you need a union to represent you as a teacher, and that's a legitimate concern for you, maybe there's another option too. How about create a different teacher union? Create a competitive union to fight the one that is dormant and doesn't represent you. Isn't the idea of the union is to actually represent the people that are in the union? If the union that exists now fails to do that, make a different one. Make it legitimate. And now you're in competition with the one that don't want to help the teachers. That will give you the stability that you want in your union, but still let the union know that, you know what, we run the union, you don't run us. Because that's really what it has to come down to. When a union gets to the point, and most of them do, where they run you rather than you run the union, it ceases being what the union was meant to be in the first place. So perhaps another peg in this strategy, if you will, is to form a different union in competition to the one that exists, one that actually represents the teachers, and you might as well ally with the parents because they're your natural ally, because they're the ones directly tied to your students, which are tied to your job. Maybe forming another union would be a good move, something to consider. And finally, I want to look at this idea that she brought up to me. It's not like her idea, it's her observation, where she's talking about this thing in the sciences where empirical evidence has been removed and it's been replaced with the idea of consensus. Now, I know initially this sounds kind of strange because, of course, there's this concept that in the sciences you generally get a consensus over time over something that's seen as, well, true. And that consensus is a way of validating something as being true. So the idea that we're pitting empirical evidence against consensus and vice versa does seem kind of foreign at first, but I want to explain a little bit further what she means by that, and I have seen this applied in my own field. And it's basically like this. You can have empirical evidence, and over time, consensus will form to validate the observations of that evidence, and therefore that consensus establishes it more as true. All right, this is a basic way in which it's meant to operate in a naturalistic science type of operation. But see, what happens if you remove the empirical evidence and just use consensus? Well, then it ceases to be science. Now, how can that be? Right? How can that be? I want to give you these two examples to sort of explain the conflict that we're having here. The first one is probably well known by many of you. It's the conflict that Galileo had in his day. He's usually presented as the scientist guy versus the church, and of course it's meant to be a ridicule upon how anti-science Christianity is or something like that. But here's the reality of that scenario. When Galileo was emphasizing heliocentric solar system versus the Earth-centered version, which had been accepted for hundreds of years as scientific truth, the consensus of all the scientific minds in Galileo's day was against him. They all believed in the Earth being the center and everything revolving around the Earth. Galileo challenged it with even more clearer observations, empirical evidence, and the consensus was against him. Now, it wasn't like, well, the church said no, and that was the end of the matter. See, the scientists of the day, in all the knowledge of the science and what they thought, the scientists themselves were against Galileo. Not because the church said so, but because to them their scientific consensus said so. So if we're to adopt this mentality of it's just a consensus that makes something right, then we would have to accept that we still must look at the Earth as the center and everything revolves around the Earth, not around the sun. But the reason we have come to adopt a greater understanding that we actually rotate around the sun is because of observations that Galileo had made and Copernicus and other people have made, to where that information, that empirical observation, becomes accepted and then thus, yes, becomes the consensus. It becomes the consensus not because everyone decided this is what we want to believe. It becomes the consensus because everyone sees that the facts now fit the conclusion. Not that you wanted the conclusion to be what it is ahead of time. Another example is with Einstein. Einstein and his theory of relativity. Today, we kind of look at it as like obvious, like, well, yeah, Einstein made it, right? The theory of relativity, of course it's correct. But back in his day, when Einstein came up with this theory of special relativity and all these other things that he was defining, the overwhelming consensus of the world in physics was against him. Now, if you just go with, well, the consensus says, then this must be true, then you'd have to say, well, sorry, Einstein, your theory is just not true. No one else wants to agree with you, so it must be wrong. Irregardless of the things you're pointing out and, you know, that you can back it up with that big brain of yours, it doesn't matter because, well, there's no consensus. This is the problem we're talking about, where science is reduced to a majority vote. And I have seen this in my own field in theology, where there's a consensus being used, but not empirical observation. And it's very frustrating to a guy like me. But I can see what Rebecca is talking about even in my own field, where I see this being done continuously. In fact, one of the arguments I see often made in defense of a theological point is the majority view is, or if you come up with a counter, they go, well, yes, that's the minority view. And they state it as if to emphasize, well, because you have the minority view, it can't be correct because I'm in the majority view and the majority is always right. And I'm simply like saying, well, prove what you're saying. Just prove it. And then, irregardless of the numbers of people liking it or disliking it, is it true or not? That's what I want to know. I have seen this in my studies where I would do these papers on controversial subjects in theology, and I would look up the sources for all these different things, and I did notice a pattern. A lot of people will state their position, and they will have numerous citations of people to back up the conclusion of what they're saying. And I'm just one of those people that goes, interesting, I don't know how you come to that conclusion. Oh, you cited these people. Well, I better see what they wrote. And I actually look up what they write. I know it's rare, but you know what? You should try that sometime to check the sources that people reference, because they might not even be good sources to begin with. And here's what I found out. When I look up their sources that they cite, they don't demonstrate empirically anything either. They simply state the same opinion, and they quote other people who have the same opinion, and they quote other people who have the same opinion, but not one of them had once demonstrated definitively what they're saying to quote in the first place. So what you have, in essence, is the consensus prevailing over the empirical. If you find enough people to agree with you about something, basically what happens is you all just quote each other, and you have all these citations to say, look, this person with this degree says this, and this person says this. And if you have enough of you, it gives the impression that all these smart people must have come to the same conclusion because, look, they got degrees, they're quoting this person, that person, and there's all this foundation to back up what they're saying. Not true. They have citations, but none of those citations really back up what they're saying. They're just quoting someone else saying, look, this person also has the same opinion as I do. Citation. And then it's put as a reference, and that's somehow supposed to provide what I call a false ethos to back up a point that you never backed up in the first place. And it's not just in my realm of studies. I think this is a rampant thing in numerous places. I've seen all kinds of complaints through academia where the citation's horrible. Things aren't being demonstrated. It's basically, if I want this to be true, people find a way to make it true. And if there's enough consensus, well, there you go. It's true. I find this very disturbing. And I am upset that academia actually tolerates this sort of thing. But hey, if you just want to control what people think rather than teaching them how to actually think, well, that's just the way you have to go. Consensus. And we think it's a consensus where everybody is conceding freely, but that's not the case either. Because if you're in a realm where all the editors of the big name magazines that you need to get into, all the professional journals, if you want to be on a lecture circuit, things like this, it's known that you have to say certain things or they're not even going to consider you. But what if what you're saying is actually true? Well, you don't have the consensus, right? Everyone knows there's hot button things that if you write certain things, you will get noticed. Well, guess what people are going to write? The things that get them noticed. You know how the old adage goes, publish or die. If you don't get printed, if you don't get put into journals, if you don't have these book deals, they assume you're no good. But what that really means is you know how to write what people want to hear, and you get attention for yourself. That's what makes you a big name. But it has nothing to do with what's right or wrong. It's just popularity. It's absolutely astounding to me that we dare call this stuff science and philosophy and theology and whatever other categories. I'm not mad at people's conclusions so much as how they come to them and defend them with no basis whatsoever. That's what really kind of rubs me the wrong way. We should have the right to say, how do you know that's true? And can you back that up? And at least make you think about it and try to defend it. But when it comes to, well, if your first resort is just, well, the consensus says, or the majority position is, how about if I said, I don't care, I actually want you to show it to me? Could you do that? Chances are, I think a lot of people can't. And that's what's disturbing to me. Our education should not be based upon a vote. It should be based upon certainties.
You've been listening to Rage of the Age. If you loved today's podcast, make sure to leave a review on the media you're listening through. Secure future episodes by heading over to rageoftheage.com and clicking the RSS feed button. Until next time, this has been Rage of the Age.